Okay, so this is a screencast about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing integers. And we've been over this in our pre-algebra classes, but I want to go over this again with you guys and post it up here just in case you need it. Alright, so remember our addition rule, we talked about counters. So if I had a question like -3 plus 4, remember I had 3 negatives and 4 positives. That when I did this, I had what's called 0 pairs. And what the 0 pairs were there were a negative and a positive together, and they cancel each other out to give me my sum, which in this case is the one that's left over, which is 1 positive. And I can do this for a variety of different situations, like -5 plus a -3. In this case, I have 5 negatives here. I have 3 negatives here. Now, did I create any 0 pairs? I didn't, because no positives and negatives came together. So therefore, my answer is -8 in this case. If I had a situation like 4 plus -7, same thing as earlier. I have 4 positives. I have 7 negatives. And again, I create a 0 pair here. 2, 3, 4 0 pairs, and what's left is my answer, which is 3 negatives. So this is what we do for addition. Another way to see the addition rules would be to look at the number line. And on the number line, if I had the problem -4 plus 5, I would do the same thing. I would start at 0 and I would go back 4 because that's my first number. So I'd go back 1, 2, 3, 4. But now I'm going to go forward 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get my sum, which is 1 again. So the number line is another useful way to do addition. Now when I'm talking about doing subtraction, if you know addition, subtraction's easy. To do subtraction, you do the same thing as addition, except you have to add one little step. So if I had the subtraction problem 3 minus a -4, I use the mnemonic device keep, add, opposite to do this. And what this means is that I'm going to keep my first number the same. I'm going to change my subtraction to addition, and I'm going to add the opposite. In this case, instead of -4, I'm going to add +4. Alright, so that I have 3 plus 4, which is 7, which is pretty easy. If I had -2 minus 4, same thing. I'm going to keep my first the same. I'm going to change my subtraction to addition, and I'm going to change this +4 to a -4. Now I have -2 plus -4, which if you remember with our addition rules, I could say these are 2 negatives here, 4 negatives here, and therefore I get 6 negatives total. So you can see subtraction is just logically an extension of addition. So now that brings us to multiplication and division. Now these are, you do multiplication and division the same exact way you've always done it, except you have to have some little rules. And basically the rules are this, as we talked about in class. So the rules that we use are the following. If I have a positive times a positive, or divided, same thing, positive divided by a positive, that of course gives me a positive. And we've done that for years. Now the new rules are if you have a negative times a negative, that's a positive. Or a negative divided by a negative, that's also a positive. If you have a negative times a positive, that's a negative. Same thing if you have a negative divided by a positive, that's a negative. If you have a positive times a negative, that's a negative. And the same thing with division. And there's a more generalized rule, and the more generalized rule is this. If I have an odd number of negative signs in my problem, my answer is negative. And you can see that if you just kind of think about it. If I had -1 times -4 times -3, I have 3 negatives here. Well, -1 times -4 is +4. Bring down my -3, and 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. So if I have an odd number of negatives, my answer is negative. Conversely, if I have an even number of negatives, you probably can guess this, my answer is positive. And that is, and I can give you an example of that. That's like negative 2 times negative 3 times negative 4 times negative 5. Here I have 4 negatives. So I can say negative 2 times negative 3 is 6 times negative 4 times negative 5. 6 times negative 4 is negative 24 times negative 5. And negative 24 times negative 5 gives me a positive 120. So that's a quick overview of your integer rules. Combine this with your order of operations and you can solve pretty much everything that we're going to do this year.